Some of these people don't care if they take human life. Actors coming at us around the clock. Now we're receiving death threats. We're receiving rape threats against, our children. This is no longer about hacking. As we were interviewing, I had received a message from a frenemy of mine letting me know that someone is running an op against me. Yeah, it's all right. I'll be all right. Thankfully, it's that person and not one of these groups. Hackers exist because we have a ravenous hunger, an innate hunger for information, for knowledge, for thinking outside the box. And when you put people like that together, we don't care about the things that the world wants to pick at. You know what I mean? Because none of that matters. It really doesn't. It really doesn't on any level. In the beginning, I had just joined a hacker group at first called the Insane Masterminds Crew. And then when I was done with that is when I created the ETA. It was an extended family. In fact, at the time, it was arguably more important than anything that was going on in my life. Some of the activities that we engaged in the ETA was combating cyberbullying, pedo hunting, and dismantling problematic hacking groups. We had created a name for ourselves for combating against cyberbullies. So I received a lot of reports from people asking for help to, look into matters and to, stop it. In one case, there was a young girl who was being victimized by an ex-boyfriend of all things. Him and his close friend, and photoshopping images of her that were inappropriate. And at the time, we didn't have laws that govern these things. We didn't have programs in school to help, young people decompress from experiencing cyberbullying and the mental health effects that it has on people. And she didn't have any way to combat it. They were calling her at work. They were blowing up her phone, her house phone, and every account that she had just to, take shots at her. And it is just really, really repulsive. So for her, we were her last effort to hopefully resolve it and get them to leave her alone. So what we ended up doing is social engineered him through MySpace, got into his email account, he made websites for local bands. So we took the website offline, changed his financial information, and then called him in the middle of the night and made threats that he's going to leave her alone or else it's going to get worse. And he absolutely agreed and left her alone and never spoke to her again. Took down all the offending media that he and his friends had made and cut off all communication completely. So we ended up adopting her and teaching her, our methods, the tools. She ended up becoming very formidable social engineer and one of our founding members. When you're dealing with cyberbullies, what you end up having to do is you have to become a bigger bully than the bully in order to get them to cease and desist. And for someone who may, like myself, who started this group with good intentions, it was easy for me to become poisoned by having to become a worse predator than the cyber bullies that were, attacking innocent people. And as my group became, started to get bigger and with more infamy and more fame and more attraction to our cause, I began to become a lot like my enemies while still doing these things, these noble causes, but they were less about like the victim and more about our infamy. At the time, the ETA was an underground group for the most part. We didn't have a public-facing like website and all this stuff. We produced media, but people didn't know where we were online, and was our superpower, is that we offered no attack surface to rivals. So when my members were like, you know what, we want a democracy or we're gonna have a problem. So I was like, all right, well, have your democracy. Since it's up to a vote, yeah, go ahead. We can be public. You can have a public-facing website and do all this stuff so we can all be seen. And now we can deal with that, as our rivals start to move in on us. And so that's what happened. We were at war with Anonymous at the time. And now you have to understand, Anonymous back then was different than what we have now. Back then it was Chanology, and it was like 4chan, things like that. Where on one hand, Anonymous, there was a branch of Anonymous that protested against the Church of Scientology. Then you had the image boards and that whole weird subculture going on there. Anonymous hadn't become real hacktivists until like WikiLeaks happened, and that's when they really found their calling. So back then, the ETA was combating just a different kind of version of Anonymous that most people who are just arriving on the scene have no idea about. With so many members, and we're only about 50 people, but with only maybe 10 people active at any given time, we're dealing with international actors coming at us around the clock. With most of us, though, we're in the United States, so at some point we're asleep. And when we're asleep, attacks are happening. And they became very personal. Now we're receiving death threats. We're receiving rape threats against, our children, against my wife. Now things are this is no longer about hacking. This is something else. Now, part of me is wondering, is this juvenile posturing? Is this something that I should just overlook? Because that is a thing that we experience when you're sitting in chat rooms with people is just juvenile posturing. Is this serious? We don't know. We don't know until you know. And my member, he had his house vandalized. So someone obtained his address from this court document and then had someone or themselves visit his home where he was living and vandalized it. So now I'm seeing real life threats happening. So there was probably about 4 Anonymous members that were the most persistent in their efforts to try to get a reaction out of us and who were issuing these threats, right? Some of my members secretly doubled as members of Anonymous, and we did it in secret because we had a lot of allies, right? We had a lot of allies who provided a lot of tactical support whenever we needed things like a massive botnet army. We could call on them, but we also had to maintain a sense of diplomacy with them because they did not like Anonymous. So we had to keep our dealings with them a secret, just to placate our allies. Aside from that, there was probably about 4 members that we know for sure that were behind these attacks that we were experiencing. There were also probably a whole host of others that we weren't aware of, but there was 4 that were at the forefront of this anti-ETA operation that was underway. So people in my group were dropping out. They didn't want to deal with this, with the consequences of their democracy. Yeah, I'm kind of like putting this on them. They didn't want to deal with this. So it pretty much became up to about 2 or 3 of us to have to take on all of this drama. One of the problems that we see a lot of in hacktivist groups is that we have goals that are good, for example, but the process of obtaining those goals or satisfying them ends up generating so much attention that it ends up creating a mob mentality where people are hacking or acting emotionally or instinctively and not thinking about whether or not this target is in scope. For example, right now we have Op Russia. Now, to get a general sense of what the goals of Op Russia are about is to punish Putin and to try to restrain their war efforts against Ukraine and disrupt it in any way possible. But what ends up happening in this mob mentality is that hacktivists can't seem to distinguish the difference between a Russian citizen or like a company or a school, a university, things that have nothing to do with Putin or the military, and they are attacking everything. So there is a group that I have recently seen just kind of like materialize out of thin air, and I have no idea where it's come from or its members. We usually have a reputation, you know what I mean? Hackers, we can kind of like see where, you know, this hacker has been. I have a long history. This group does not. We have no idea where they came from, but their number one Op Russia targets have been power plants and one nuclear power plant, which is home to about 65,000 people. And that's typically uncommon because usually population is away from such structures like this, but this one is different. This one actually has a big bustling, you know, population. And we had people, our operators from our group, go in and try to speak to them about the ramifications of taking human life. By blowing up a power plant, it will cause global discussions about cyber attacks and usage every day. It could very well create a new atmosphere for everyday users. And just to think, ending the lives of 65,000 or more people who had nothing to do with like the Kremlin, Putin, Russia's attack against Ukraine. But people don't see it that way. Some of these people don't care if they take human life. And so that poses a problem. And so we are seeing like a kind of culture that's centered around a mentality that does not care. And that's terrifying. That's terrifying. One of the things that I like to say, and I might say it in a cheeky sort of way, but, you know, hack responsibly. That's what I want to see. And I want them to not make those mistakes that I made, because the consequences at this point in time, they could be loss of human life, and it could be their own lives. Prison is not a place for hackers. We're not like other people.